Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gerrit Riese and I'm happy to be the chair of this session. We will start right now and the time slot's changed a little bit, so we have an hour, and I'm happy to introduce David Kelly to you. David and I, we know each other a few years now, and I had the opportunity to meet him on a few times at different occasions, and it's always a pleasure to learn from him. So he's a real central guy in the learning and development community, because all of the nice work that he did in the past around curating all the content of different conferences, and that's what brought him to his actual job at e-learning guild, being a director there. So he really is in the middle of our community. In life, if you want to be successful, I think two things are important. First, you have to work hard. That's what David always does and also will do today. The second one is to make the right choices. And you made the right choice today to be here at this session with David Kelly. So please give him an applause and
thank you, sir.
Let's get started.
Thank you so much, Gary. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today. It's my pleasure to be with you today to spend the next hour exploring what's going on in the world of technology and the work that we do. Before I get started, I want to bring up one URL. I'll show it again at the end. This URL at the end, it'll be at the top for those of you that are at the back might not be able to see it. But if you're interested in any of the slides, any of the references that I make to different things throughout the day, that will take you to a page on my blog that has all the resources that I mentioned today, plus in addition, a number of additional resources if you want to dig further into the topics that we're discussing here today. So you don't have to worry about taking pictures of screens or anything. Everything will be available right there. Feel free to take pictures if you like, but I'll show that URL again at the end. And doing a presentation like this, I always think about what are the visuals that I want to use. And as we all know, the title slide is extremely important. What are we going to put on that title slide? And I thought, you know, looking at the now and the next of learning and technology, it's kind of got this prediction thing, maybe someone who's looking into the future in a crystal ball, maybe that would be appropriate. And I thought, well, you know, this is a learning technologies conference. Maybe I should go something that's a little bit more digital, something that's got more representative of the tech. And I still thought maybe that's not it either, but what is this conversation ultimately about? This conversation is ultimately about looking into the future and thinking about how technology is going to shape the way that we learn as individuals and the way that we use technology to build learning programs for others. And it's really making those predictions. And as I thought about that, I thought, well, if we're talking about looking into the future and really making predictions about what's going to happen in the work that we do, I should be honest and go with a blindfolded monkey throwing darts. Because the reality is everything that we do, we're talking about, we're guessing about what we do. We're looking at the trends, and we're looking at how the trends are shaping and how we can look at what we've done in the past and put that into the context of the trends that we're dealing with in the current state. But the reality is words are important. And I want to get into the words for a second here. For instance, the title of this session, is it A, the now and next of learning and technology, or B, the now and next of learning technology? How many think it's A? How many think it's B? How many don't care? The reality is, it's a subtle difference. They look like the same things in here, but I think it's important to realize that these are two very, very different phrases here. Too often, the title of this session is the top one, the now and next of learning and technology. And that use of the word and is very important in my mind. Because when you don't do it and you just say the now and next of learning technology, if you look at the idea of how we define as an industry the idea of learning technology, the reality is most of what we put under the heading of learning technologies are not learning technologies. They're educational technologies. They're training technologies. That's not a good or a bad thing, but it's an important distinction for us to recognize. Learning technologies, as we have shaped that definition as an industry, usually fall under the heading of education and training technologies. And the intersection of learning in and of itself and technology is a different thing. And I can think of no better example of that than this guy. This is my son. His name's Shay. And this is Christmas morning. Him with his favorite toy. If you're not familiar with the toy that he's got, it's a BB-8 toy from Star Wars that you use with an app that's on your phone to control it to go around the room. And if we're being completely honest, he got it Christmas morning because I wanted to play with it. But it was a very interesting thing within that morning because he got it, and again, you have to use the phone with the app. And I put the app on the phone, and he's playing around with it, and he goes, "Dad, I need your phone." And I got nervous because he was using my wife's phone, and I thought, oh God, he broke a phone. But the reality was I didn't. I said, well, what's the matter? He said, I want to watch the YouTube video on how to play this. And in our house, we have two different sides. I am the digital side, the shiny new object, likes to play with new things. My wife is the put the phone down, go outside and play and go draw, do something that's not digital. So the idea of my wife coming downstairs and seeing him not with one phone in his hand, but two, was not a good idea. So I said, I'm sorry. You're going to have to put the phone, you're going to have to turn off the app to use the toy, launch the YouTube app so you can watch the video, and then go back and use the other app to use the toy again. He's 9 years old, and this was a hardship. This was me being unreasonable as a parent in his mind. But he did it. And I said, I'm sorry, you're going to have to deal with it. And I go back in the other room and I start making breakfast. And suddenly I hear the YouTube video playing, but it's playing really, really loud, like way too loud for a smartphone. And I walk in the room, and there he is with the phone, and he's using the app, and on the television is the YouTube video that he wanted to watch. He had figured out, all right, I can't have two phones, so I'll just watch it there, which was very interesting to see how he went about doing this. But what I found most interesting is while I'm watching this and thinking this is how he's wired, I looked down at the box where this toy came out of, and there, still perfectly sealed in plastic, is the multi-page instructional manual that someone spent a large amount of time writing so that you could learn how to use it, and he had no interest in it. And that's really the way that we're wired today. How many of you went out to dinner with someone last night in this area? You probably at some point in time, whether it's last night or any dinner party that you've been to, you have a conversation, everyone's having a great time, and then there's a question that comes up that nobody knows the answer to, and within about a second and a half, someone at the table will say what? I'm going to Google it. I'm going to look it up. That's just the environment that we're in today. That it's just, nobody at that table said, give me a second, I'm going to log into the LMS. Nobody said that. Because the reality is, we live in an environment where we're just going to self-serve ourselves. And that's what's happening in the world of learning. That's how we look at technology in terms of how it's shaping the way that we learn as compared to learning technologies. Both are important, but it's important that we also explore the difference. If you want to predict how technology is going to change the way that we learn, you don't look at the work that we do. That's what we do in education. That's what we do in training. If you want to understand how technology is helping change the way that we learn, you follow how technology is changing how we live. That's ultimately going to shape consumer habits and human behavior habits that will ultimately get leveraged in what we do in education. It's not, if you want to understand how technology is truly changing how we learn as human beings, look at the way that we're living our day-to-day lives as compared to what we do in education. That's where you look. So this conversation that we're going to have today ultimately is not about technology. It's also really not about learning, and it's also not about training. But please don't leave. Ultimately, this is a conversation about disruption. Now, disruption is a word that gets a bad rap. A lot of people hear that word disruption and they think, ugh, that's not, it's bad. Disruption is a completely neutral word. It simply means a change in the state of the status quo. It is not positive or negative in and of itself. It just means that things have changed. What makes disruption positive or negative is not the change itself, but how we react to it. And that's what's going on in the world that we're in now. We're talking about technology disrupting the work that we do, and we have an opportunity to take that disruption and make it a change for the better, or allow that change to dictate something for the worse. And we've been through this before. How many of you come from a world of traditional training? Maybe you're still doing it in your environments today. This is what training and education looked like for a long time before technology stepped in. And then suddenly technology started to emerge, and we had this new thing called e-learning, where suddenly the world of what we thought of was learning and training and education was disrupted by these technologies that enabled us to do different things. And my question for you is, who was e-learning disruptive to? Any thoughts? I heard teachers. I break it down into 3 different groups. First group is the learners themselves. Now, first, I think we need to be acknowledged that this picture lies. I love the work that we do in e-learning. I think we do fabulous work and we make a difference in this planet, but no one in the history of mankind has ever been that happy to take an e-learning course. But this was really disruptive for learners. I know what education looks like. I come into a classroom, I sit down, and there's an expert in the front of the room who's going to share information and lead me through exercises that's going to help me learn. And now you want me to use this keyboard and this mouse? It was really disruptive for people who expected what learning was going to look like. It was also disruptive for the teachers and the trainers. I'm sorry, I work in Word or InDesign, and I put together a facilitator's guide, and now you want me to build a drag and drop? What does that even mean? That's what happened to the world of the trainer. It was really disrupted by the fact of, okay, this safe place that you exist in, it's being disruptive. It's going to be disrupted by technology. And then there's also the organizations themselves. Organizations have workflows that they count on to keep things efficient. And training existed within an organizational workflow where we had an expectation that people would come to a classroom when there was a need to learn and develop a skill, and they would go through an experience to do that. And now suddenly the organization said, well, wait a minute, we don't have to do that anymore. We have these technologies that enable them to do it from the workplace. They saw it as a positive disruption because it enabled them to be more efficient and enabled the organizations to enjoy cost savings that they've never been able to before. We kind of went a little too far in that direction in the early days of e-learning, but organizations saw it as a positive disruption because it enabled us to be more liberal, more engaging in what we do and give us more options than we could do. Those were some of the ways that e-learning disrupted the world of what we do. And that happened decades ago. But now all these new technologies are emerging. Numerous places of e-learning was just going from the classroom and going to a desktop. And that was one technology that disrupted it. And think about how disruptive that was. Now we have multiple technologies coming at us from different angles that are doing the same thing. And if you think the change from e-learning, from traditional training to e-learning was disruptive, you haven't seen anything yet. And what I want to spend the time with you today is to go through some of the technologies that are emerging that are changing the way that we look at our work. I am in a unique position in the work that I do with the e-learning guild in America, that I get to see what organizations are doing, and I get to hear from different organizations and see the work that they're doing. So I get to see the trends and how they're adopting from a unique standpoint. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a number of the trends that we see emerging and affecting the work that we do in our field. I'm going to put them in a bit of a chronological order in the sense of things that are near term, things that might be happening today, and things that are more long term. I want to put one thing out there before I start diving into this though. Context is important. What you're not going to hear me say is anything that is right or wrong. You might be looking at some of these technologies and saying, this is far out for us. We're not even close to that. That's okay. You might be looking at I might describe something that's happening now and you might think, I'm not there yet. That's okay. I might be discussing something further out and I say this is 5, 10 years out, and you might be saying, well, we're already playing in that space today. That's okay. What you need to understand is the trends that are going on and then put them in the context of your own work. That's what's important here. So with that, let's start diving into some of these trends. And I encourage you, if you have a question or anything, I mean, I know it's a little loud in here. If you have a question, I can come out and hear what the question is. We might have some time for Q&A, and I'm going to be here for the next 2 days, answer any questions that you want. But feel free to interrupt with any sort of questions that you want throughout the talk here today. So let's start with some of the stuff that's going on right now. You probably have it in your pocket or sitting in front of you on the table. Multi-device learning. How many of you are building learning programs for multiple devices today as compared to just for a desktop? Good. Most of the hands went up in here. How many of you are doing what we call responsive design? Great. It's not good enough anymore. And the reason that I say that, responsive design is a great thing. Responsive design is essentially, rather than taking this content and having the desktop screen be represented on a mobile device or on a tablet, make the content reformat in a way so that it's appropriate to the screen that's in front of you. So that if I'm looking at it on my smartphone, it's displayed in a way that I can look at it appropriately rather than trying to focus in on a desktop screen that's been small. But that, as much as that's a good thing in terms of the accessibility of and making content easier to consume, it repeats the mistake that we've made repeatedly in our industry. And that mistake is to take the existing paradigm of what is and what we do and shoehorn it into a new technology. We did that with e-learning. We took the classroom experience and we converted it into an online experience on the desktop. We ignored the fact that we were dealing with a computer. We ignored the fact that we had this processing power and graphic capabilities, and the fact that it was no longer, it's a self-served thing. We just made the classroom experience accessible. We're doing the same thing with mobile, and responsive design is basically saying take this content that we designed with a desktop in mind and make it accessible in an appropriate way on a smartphone. But think about what your smartphone does. Your smartphone has GPS, it has an accelerometer, it has a camera, it has processing power that makes the early e-learning computers look like they were from decades ago. And we use it to just basically repeat the desktop experience. Putting it another way, think about how you use your smartphones in your organizations, how you're developing, how you're making courses accessible in your organization. Now compare that to how you've used your smartphone so far today. It's not even noon. And think about all the different ways you've probably used your smartphone today. And compare that to how you use it within your organization. I would guess, without even speaking to most of you, that there's a pretty wide gap between how you use it within your organization and how you use it in day-to-day life. That gap represents a huge opportunity in multi-device learning. Think about how we're using these devices in our day-to-day lives. That is, going back to the comment I made earlier, if you want to see how technology is shaping the way that we learn, look at how technology is shaping the way that we live. We live with these devices in a very different way than what we do from an educational standpoint. And that gap represents an opportunity. There are lots of things going on in the mobile space around adaptive learning technologies and ways to leverage the unique affordances of mobile devices in ways that we could never do with a desktop. Mobile is a great example of a problem that I think exists within our industry. I mentioned the fact that we're repeating the problems that we have with these new technologies. And I think it's because we approach new technologies with the wrong question. Anytime a new technology comes up, whatever it happens to be, we look at the work that we do and we say, how do I do what I do with this new technology that's in front of me? How do I do what I do when this new technology is being put in front of me? And I think that's the wrong question. That question paints the box of what I do. I think we would be better served anytime a new technology to come out and say, what does this new technology do that I couldn't do before? What does this new technology enable me to do that I've never been able to do before? And that affects your purchasing decisions, that affects your strategies, that affects everything. If you can't answer the question of what could this technology do for me today that I wasn't able to do yesterday, then why would you buy it? And mobile is a great example of that. Mobile can do a lot of different things that we just don't take advantage of because we're defining it through the lens of what I do. And that theme extends to all the other technologies that I'm going to talk about today. But I think it's important to bring it up because mobile, for most of us, we have it in our pockets already, and it's an opportunity for us to do more. Data and analytics. What is the two-word phrase that is prevalent in the world as it relates to data today? I had somebody say big data. That's all you hear about, big data, big data, big data. What does it mean? And please don't tell me that it means that it's big. Lots of data. And lots of data, to me, represents part of the thing that I find interesting. For me, the phrase big data, big doesn't matter to me. Because big is just representative of the fact that we are generating more data on an exponential level than we ever have before. But what really is attractive to the big data conversation isn't the amount of data, isn't the size of the pile of data. It's the computers that are available today and the processing power that is enabling us to take that data, crunch those numbers. I want to go in that room, that sounds like fun. It enables us to crunch those numbers and really provide valuable analytical data and solutions to problems through that. This is a big thing in our world. Not in our learning world, in our world. This is changing the way that we look at data and how we make decisions because of the computer processing power and the data that's available to us today. It's also going to affect our world. In the United States, one of the things that we're looking at that's generating a lot of interest is the Experience API, which is a replacement for SCORM in the e-learning world, which enables us to track things in different ways. There's a lot of potential in terms of this new specification, being able to tell stories for learning that we've never been able to tell before. Most of the data that we get through e-learning consists of really, really important metrics like how many people completed the course, what grade did they get, how many people are compliant. These are not business metrics. These are not going to get us to really be strategic. Something like new analytical specifications like the Experience API and other ones are enabling us to do things in the learning space that enable us to be more predictive in the analytics that we do and to respond to people in greater time or even in real time. Now, Experience API is an example of a technology that's already being brought into the learning and development space. If you're playing in this space, great. But if you're not playing in this space, don't think that you don't have to worry about data and analytics. Data and analytics, I brought up big data because this is something that's going on in the world and it's advancing at a rapid pace. You may not, in your organization, be someone that says there's opportunities for learning and development if we change the way we look at data. I encourage you to do that, but you may not be in a position to do that. And if you're not, that doesn't mean you don't have to worry about data and analytics. Because if you're not the people who are going to bring a new data and analytics discussion into your organization, your IT department will. This is not the data and analytics conversation as it applies to L&D isn't a question of if, it's a question of when. And it's going to impact the work that you do, whether you're bringing it in through technologies that you're using for L&D, or you get a knock on the door from your IT department who says, we've changed our systems, here's what you need to know. Whether you're going to be proactively playing in this space or it's going to come at you from the IT department, you need to be tracking this space, because even if you're not going to bring it into your organization, when that knock comes on the door, you want to be able to participate in the conversation. So you want to follow what's going on in the data and analytics space, in the big data space, so that you're ready for that conversation. Interactive video. There's a lot of different statistics that are out there around the consumption of video online, how it's becoming the #1 source of internet traffic. Already is, but it's just growing. And the idea of what video is as it relates to learning has been the same since armed forces were using them for training videos on those reel-to-reel film reels back in the 40s and the 50s. The technology in terms of the resolution and the clarity of that video has increased tremendously in that time, but what video means has not changed that much over the last century. It's starting to change. Video is becoming more interactive in ways that we are still just making sense of. And I'm not talking about simple interaction like branching scenarios that use video, which is still interactive video. I'm talking about interactive video where technologies exist that can look at the video and make every word that's said metadata. So that instead of going out to Google, just as an example, instead of going out to Google and doing a search, putting something into a search bar, and it comes up if it matches the title of a video, what you get is search results that mention if someone said that in a video and where they said that in the video. It makes video a much more powerful tool for learning. And it does so in a way that is radically different than how we define video today. Video in terms of its ability to be interactive is rapidly advancing, and it has tremendous opportunities for the work that we do. Games-based learning. How many of you are using games in your learning programs today? Yeah, it's usually just a couple of hands that come up. And the reason for that, in my mind, is the name, games. I know in the work that I've done with organizations, the idea of walking into my CEO's office and say, I've got this great idea that's going to solve all of our problems. We're going to get everyone together and play a game. Usually it's a matter of, you need to rethink what you just said and leave my office and come back when you have a better idea. Not because it's positive, not because it's a valid concern, it's because this idea of playing a game is just not acceptable in many organizations. But there's a lot of emerging research around the idea of games-based learning that is showing the validity of it as a tool for skill development and for learning. And as more and more research emerges around this topic, the credibility for it starts to spread. So I expect to see a lot more organizations getting engaged in games-based learning. Games is another thing that I think is representative of another tip that I always give people. If you want to go into your organization and propose a games-based solution, try and do it without using the word game. You lose our jargon. Too many times we have taught, as a profession, we have talked our way out of discussions by leaning on our jargon in terms of when we're trying to explain to people what it is. They don't care about our jargon. Talk about the activities that people are going to be engaged in during the game, but don't say it's a game. Talk about the benefits of what they're going to be able to do and how it's going to develop skills, but don't use the word game. You can, if you try and phrase what you're doing in a way that is describing the activities that people will do and the benefits that it's going to have on the back end, you'll get a lot more buy-in than if you say, I want them to play a game. Games-based learning, there's a lot of research on it. I encourage you to be following that. I separate games-based learning from gamification. A lot of people put the two of those together, and I think it's important for us to separate them. Gamification is using game-like elements in a non-gaming environment. So if you happen to have one of those fitness trackers, I have my Apple Watch, and every movement I make, that it tells me what I'm doing. And if I happen to be sitting too long, it'll get a little tap on the wrist that says, hey, why don't you get up and walk around the room? And it gives me a little dial on it that throughout the day it goes up. And yesterday I was playing the tourist, and I was walking around town, and before noon I got this little dial up that said, you've reached your goal for the day. And it gave me a little endorphin boost about how I was exercising throughout the day. That's all gamification. It's just using game-based game elements in a non-gaming environment to motivate people. And it's different from games-based learning. Games-based learning is using a game, having people learn through the process of playing a game. It is literally a game. Gamification is using gaming elements in a non-gaming environment. Both are valid, but I would not commingle the two of them too much because they work in two entirely different arenas. There's a lot of interest in gamification in our field. I would also encourage you to look outside our field because there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in the gamification space. There's also a lot of interesting conversation around the ethics of gamification and the fine line that exists between using gamification to motivate someone into an activity and using gamification to manipulate someone into an activity. It is a very fine line that if you're going to be engaging in gamification and starting to use that in part of your strategy, you should look into that because it's an important line not to cross. Then there's this idea of a shift to performance support. We live in an increasingly mobile world where people are working all the time and they're not always at a desk and they're not always looking to engage in a course to get a learning thing. More and more organizations are interested in performance support. I don't like the phrase performance support. It describes a particular approach to how we do it. Essentially, performance support is the idea of what is the least disruptive way that I can give people what they want, when they need it, where they need it. and just giving them that little nugget of information at the time that they need it in the workflow of them actively engaged in it. That's what performance support is. I don't like the phrase performance support because you go up to an actual trainer and say, do you do performance support? And they say, well, yeah, I do training. I support performance through training. Performance support is describing a methodology of giving people what they need, when they need it, where they need it, in the workflow. Without, we tend to exist in our world of learning and development in a space where you're working, and if you need to learn, you need to stop working so that you can go learn. And then when you're done learning, you can go back and work. Performance support wants to get rid of that line and find a way to get people what they need in the process of working so that they can be more productive. Now, there's another phrase that exists within this performance support conversation that is emerging a lot in the work, and that's microlearning. I actually don't have a slide for microlearning because I'm still on the fence personally as to where I think the microlearning conversation is. Microlearning, at least within the US, I see it globally as well, but definitively within the US, is probably the biggest buzzword in our industry right now. I hate buzzwords. Buzzwords are not, anytime I see a buzzword, I get a big red flag. And the reason for that is I define a buzzword as a term whose usage is spreading faster than its understanding. And that's what microlearning is. Right now, microlearning, if you just follow the buzz of our industry, microlearning is going to solve everything. It's going to be the thing that changes everything. We need to micro all the things because of attention spans and all sorts of data that is really not valid. So I'm kind of on the fence, but where I will say is the idea, I'm on the fence of microlearning as a thing. I think the idea of performance support is proven. It's a proven methodology. So I would encourage you to adopt a performance support mindset, which aligns with a lot of what people will say as a microlearning mindset, which is don't throw the book at people. Look for ways to give people only what they need, when they need it, where they need it. If you can adopt that mindset, you're going to be able to have a lot better conversations with the organizations you support. Don't use the phrase performance support. Just go into the room and talk to people and say, well, what if I gave them exactly what they needed, only what they needed, when they needed it, where they needed it, so they can get it while they're working? No organization is going to fight you on that. More and more organizations are actually asking for this. They're just not using the phrase performance support. Curation. Curation is another term that is gaining a lot of buzz, but I think it's an important one. Curation is something that is I'm extremely passionate about it. It's one of my personal interests because I think it's something that is important for us for life. We've all started the morning. Curation is an example for me that represents day-to-day life, just in the sense of I wake up each morning and I'm excited to go to work, and I'm going to attack the day, and I'm going to do all these different things. And I go to my computer, I've got my coffee, I'm like, all right, let's get the day started. And I turn on the computer and I see you have 98 unread emails. And I open up my internet browser and I start just getting hammered with information all over the place. And I find myself, my shoulders just start to go down. I'm like, oh, yeah. Because we're just getting hammered with noise all the time. Not only in our personal lives, but not only in our work lives, but in our personal lives. How many of you have been scrolling through your favorite social media feed, whatever that happens to be, that you're like, oh, let me take 2 minutes and find out what's going on in the world. And then suddenly you look at the clock on the top of your thing and you realize, wow, I've been scrolling for about 45 minutes right now. Because you just get lost in this sea of information. And that's just a change in the environment in which we live. Curation helps us with that. Curation, Steve Rosenbaum wrote a book called Curation Nation that's got one of my favorite quotes as it relates to this topic. Curation replaces noise with clarity. It enables us to block out the noise of all the limitless information that's out there and find the information that's available to us. A lot of people look at it when you open up your computer in the morning, it's like opening up a fire hose and trying to take a drink. You're never going to get it all. You're just trying to get a little bit of a drink. I live in New York, if you haven't been able to tell from the voice. And I live just outside of New York on Long Island. And I go into New York City all the time. And New York City is like Singapore. There are thousands of buildings all around New York City. And I love driving over the bridge into the city and just looking at the skyline. Gorgeous. It's one of my favorite things to see. But there are thousands of buildings in New York City. But when I look at that skyline, similar to the skyline here, I see 10 buildings. Why? Because they're taller. They are elevated to a higher level of visibility, and therefore they get noticed more. That's what curation is in an L&D context. To recognize that there is huge amounts of data and information and sharing going on in your organization, to find the nuggets of real value and elevate that to a higher level of visibility. We all work in organizations where there are pockets of people who have figured out a better way of doing things. We've all been in that environment where someone goes out, they leave the office, they go to training for a week. They come back after this week of training where they learned all the standards and learned how to do all these things. They come back in the office and immediately someone at the desk next to them says, I know you just went to training, but let me show you how it's really done. Because they've figured out different ways to do things. Our role in L&D is uniquely positioned to take advantage of that, to find out these examples of where people have figured out a better way to polish it so that it fits the organizational culture, and to take that solution and bring it up to a higher level of visibility. One of the reasons curation is also a core element of L&D going forward, in my opinion, is it matches the speed at which we need to work. When I used to work in the financial field, decades ago, we won't go into my age, but when I worked in the financial field, it was not uncommon for someone to come up to me and say, we have a problem, we need your help. And I would say, no problem. Let me take 2 weeks to do some analysis on the population, and then I'm going to take another week to go over and analyze the data that we collected. Then I'm going to take 2 weeks to build a pilot program. I'm going to take a month to roll that out. Then we're going to take another 2 weeks to analyze the results of that pilot program, and then we're going to start to roll it out to the entire organization. We should have the entire organization out there with this solution in about 6 months. And I got away with that. In today's environment, you get someone who comes to the problem and they say, I say, all right, here's all the things I want to do. They say, that's great, except I need it by Monday. And that's the environment that we're all in today. We have to do more solutions faster. Curation is a solution to that. Because if you think in a world of exponentially increasing information, that someone somewhere on the planet hasn't already solved your problem, you're probably wrong. We all think our organizations are unique snowflakes, and we are in many ways, but what makes us unique is probably 10%. The 90% is probably something that someone somewhere else has already solved. Think of leadership development programs as an example. Why would you create a leadership development program from scratch? You can curate resources. There's a whole compliance aspect of making sure that you're leveraging things, copyright and such, which is, there's lots of research on how to do that and lots of practices on how to do that. But assuming you're sharing appropriately, build 80% of what you have through stuff that's already publicly available, and build the 20% of what makes your organization unique, and you'll be able to deliver a solution 80% faster. There's lots of different ways that curation works. These 5 elements that you have here, aggregation, distillation, elevation, mashup, and chronology, are some of the more popular examples, but there are a number of others. If you go to that URL that I shared you, there's a number of different resources to look at curation. If you adopt a curation-based mindset in the work that you do, you will see how you can find solutions much faster than you could ever develop them in-house. VR. How many of you are playing in the VR space? A couple of people. Every time I ask this, there's a couple of more hands that go up. VR is normal. VR has been around for decades, but VR is now emerging as a viable consumer technology. Between Oculus Rift, HTC Vive, and PlayStation VR, it's now a viable consumer product. And that's huge, because in order for technology to really work in an L&D context, it needs to be something that's been normalized in a consumer context. Otherwise, people are going to be focused more on the disruptive nature of the technology itself than on the experience they're going to have within the technology. Right now, VR is going through a very rapid normalization process. There's a lot of money flowing into VR. If you want to see how technology is going to shape the way that we learn and how technology is going to evolve, follow the money. There's a huge amount of money that's being flowed into the VR space right now that is normalizing it within a consumer culture. It's also going to take another exponential jump in 2018 when both Facebook through Oculus and HTC Vive release lower cost headsets in the US. They're going to be somewhere around $200 that are standalone headsets that no longer need a cord that goes to a very expensive computer. Now you have the opportunity to create an immersive VR experience in a standalone thing that costs under $200 to $250. That again is going to further normalize these technologies. There's a number of great learning applications that exist within VR. I go back to the statement that I made earlier. If you don't have a unique problem that can be solved by using VR, don't invest in it. VR is great for high risk, high cost, where the cost of failure in the skills development is literally life and death. VR is a tremendous tool for leveraging in those environments where you can literally immerse yourself in a life and death experience in a safe environment. There's a lot of great examples of this being done in the medical field, in the armed forces field, in the sports field, basically any place that has money. If you want to see how VR is being shaped for learning applications, there's a huge number of great resources available on the website there. But I think VR is going to be something that is going to take some quantum leaps in the next 2 years, especially in its accessibility of the work that we do. Then there's AR, augmented reality. Augmented reality started with this lovely headset. That's where the AR discussion, it's been around a long time, but it really started immersing itself in the consumer culture with Google Glass. And I love this picture of this woman who is just gloriously happy about this thing that she has on her head that makes her look like a cyborg. And I had Google Glass. I mean, I'm one of the people who walked around with these. And I loved it. Google Glass, a lot of people look at it as a failure. I look at it as one of the most successful technology rollouts ever. And I do that for two reasons. One, it makes me feel a lot better about dropping $1,500 to be a beta tester for Google. And two, I honestly do think it opened up a lot of doors. We learned a tremendous amount about what AR can do, but we also learned a tremendous amount around the normalization of what AR means. For instance, this thing on your head, when you put it on, it worked really, really well in the sense that it was an AR device that you wore that disappeared when you weren't using it. It was one of the least disruptive technologies I've ever encountered in terms of one that I use. Because I put it on and I looked up, and when it was there, I needed it, but when I wasn't there, it was just gone. Like I was wearing regular glasses. It was the least disruptive technology I ever had. The problem was it was the most disruptive technology I ever had to everyone around me. And that's what was really interesting to Google Glass, with Google, is that you discovered where the use cases were. It wasn't a use case of something that works in consumer life. Where it is a tremendous use case is in the workplace. Google Glass is not dead. It's actually been reborn as a workplace training and performance support tool. And it's one of the first tools that is out there in the mainstream being used in manufacturing and in other environments. AR has a tremendous amount of opportunity to transform what it means to be productive in a workplace. And it's going to take quantum leaps in the next year or two based on the fact that both Google and Apple have incorporated AR technology as a core element of their latest smartphones. This is going to normalize AR in a consumer technology way more than Pokemon Go ever could. Pokemon Go was something, it's gonna change the world, we're gonna make VR. I don't know about you, I mean, I play Pokemon Go. I still do, I'm one of those people. I turned off the AR component because it was completely superficial. And it wasn't a transformative AR experience. You know, when I say transformative, going back to VR for a second, if you've ever watched someone go through a VR experience when they've never had one before, you recognize that it's a transformative experience. One of the links I have on there is an experience of someone who has Parkinson's disease, who used to ski and hasn't skied in 30 years, and they put on a VR helmet, and he was able to experience skiing for the first time in 30 years when he's just always in this wheelchair. And the only thing that made him take the helmet off was the fact that the lenses were fogging up because he was crying. That is the transformative nature of VR. AR is entering its transformative moment, where now, because we have these devices that have AR in them, people are going to see AR in a completely different light. I've already seen this. The new Apple operating system only came out a couple of months ago in the US, and I've already seen this on the devices that we use. Walking around New York City with my wife, we always use Google Maps to get around, but now there's a new map app that has the AR kit attached to it, so that I'm looking around and I'm seeing arrows in the real world telling me where to go. Or when my wife and I were talking about buying a new piece of furniture, and she said, oh, we need to measure it. Let me get the measuring tape. And being the digital guy in the house, I said, hold on a second. And I pulled out my phone and I used the digital thing, and I just went like this. And she said, what are you doing? I said, I'm measuring. And she looked at me like I was crazy, and then I showed her the picture that showed me drawing a line around the window that we needed to buy something for, and how it did a measurement. And she said, that's not accurate. So we did get the measuring tape, and we did it, and she's right, it wasn't accurate. It was off by about 1/8 of a centimeter. And don't think that 1/8 of a centimeter wasn't important to my wife. But these are the things that are going to normalize AR within our community, is the stuff that when AR starts appearing in everyday applications that we use, and it becomes invisible to the user, it's going to be normalized. And that presents tremendous opportunities for us. If you want to see what the potential of augmented reality looks like in a workplace, this is not an endorsement of the product. I just think it's an amazing video, and I've linked it on there. There's a helmet called Daiquiri that is a workplace training helmet that shows you the potential of AR in a workplace, where someone is wearing these goggles, and it's recognizing what's in front of them. It's putting an overlay on how to use the equipment that's in front of them. More importantly, if there's dials and things that are in front of them, it's reading those dials, transmitting through Wi-Fi to the base so that other people can look at it, or a computer system can look at it, and giving the person who's wearing the goggles instructions on what to do based on what the goggles are seeing. That's really powerful. And it's going to transform. I actually think augmented reality will leapfrog VR in the near term, maybe 5-10 years out. Because eventually, if AR is going to be something, right now, most of the AR applications that you use is like this in your smartphone. Whether you're wearing a helmet or whether you're wearing a smartphone, essentially you've got an AR square in front of you, but there's no AR in your peripheral vision. And as that square gets bigger, and it starts to take up all of your peripheral vision of what the AR overlay can be, and you can overlay your entire field of vision, well, essentially you've got a VR environment in that case. So I could see AR leapfrogging VR 10, 15 years down the road. Then we've got wearable technology. Augmented reality, like Google Glass, was the first example of wearable technology. But wearable technology, I think, in a learning and development context, depending on where you're working, has tremendous applications beyond just augmented reality. Even something as simple, I have an Apple Watch, and right now it's off. And there are motors in here that recognize that when I do this, it recognizes that motion in my arm, and it recognizes that motion as you pulled your arm in front of your face. Chances are you want to see what's on your watch. I'll turn myself on, which is a very simple and superficial use of technology that recognizes movements. But that's going to become a lot more sophisticated, and it's going to become very quickly, it's going to be able to recognize more fine-tuned moments, and it's going to start moving down your arm to your fingers, where it starts recognizing what your fingers can do. And those technologies are going to basically analyze what someone is doing. There's a lot of this already in play in the sports field, where I'm a big baseball fan, And there are a lot of applications. I think one of the highlighted videos in my curated resources is something of a pitcher who's wearing a sleeve on his arm, and he throws 20, 30 pitches, and the computer just monitors every pitch that he does. And then they get a report that says, your arm angle is 2 degrees off, and your release point is 0.2 seconds early. And it coaches the person on what they're doing wrong when they're pitching based on the analysis. That's going to come into the workplace at some point, where we're able to better understand what people are physically doing in the workplace based on the wearable technology that's attached to them in some way. Then we've got the Internet of Things, which is another buzzword that I think is emerging in the consumer space that we're trying to make sense of. At an overly simplified level, everything, everywhere has an internet connection, which has tremendous applications in terms of the way that we live. One of the most superficial applications exists in my house. If you go into my basement in my house and you go to do laundry, you'll see a little button that's on there that I got from Amazon. I don't know if you have it out here, but at home we have what's called the Amazon Dash button, which is a little button that I got from Amazon that has the logo of my laundry detergent. And if I press that button, it will place an order for laundry detergent that will arrive at my house in 2 days. So while I'm in the moment of doing my laundry and I realize we're running low, I press a button, and 2 days later Amazon has delivered it, charged it to my account, and all I did was press a button, which I think is the coolest thing in the world. And my wife, one day, came downstairs shortly after I got that, and I'm upstairs doing some work, and I hear, "What did you put on my washing machine?" Because she saw this little button sitting there. And I said, "Oh, it's this great thing. It's from Amazon. If we're running low on laundry detergent, you press a button and it'll come." And she said, "It's stupid. I go shopping. I don't want it. Get it off my washing machine." And I said, "You don't have to use it. I'll use it, and it's there." And over the next few weeks, I would order laundry detergent. We had a couple of arguments where something would come from Amazon, but she just bought it from the store. But I still used it. I thought it was a great thing, and anytime I was low on laundry detergent, I hit it. And then one day, a box came from Amazon, and I opened it up, and it's laundry detergent. And I'm looking at it, and my wife says, "What's the matter?" She says, "We got laundry detergent." She said, "We get laundry detergent all the time." I said, "Yeah, but I didn't hit the button." And she looked me dead in the eyes with love that only a wife can do, and she said, "Shut up." But there's a normalization attached to this. As the internet, another example of this is, I have a friend who's got a really high-end car. And he got a call from the dealership saying, "We need to set up an appointment." And he said, "No, I don't need to set up an appointment. My car's fine." And he said, "No, your car needs service. It let us know." Where the car contacted the dealership with an issue, and the dealership did a service call to the person to schedule an appointment. Now, I think my favorite example of this technology is, if you're familiar with a plant that needs water, it has that little stick that you can put in the dirt that has a little dial that goes back and forth that tells you how dry the thing is. Well, now there's a new and exciting technology-based version of that where you stick it in, and if the plant needs water, this is the truth, it will tweet you. Your plant will send you a tweet that says, "I need water," which I find fascinating because I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, so that means I have to set up a Twitter account for every plant in my house. That seems a little excessive to me, but yet I still want one. But you think about the Internet of Things. Now you start to, these technologies don't exist in isolation. They're all connected. So if you think about what these technologies look like, think about a world that is fully connected. So I go back to the AR example where I'm wearing goggles. I approach a piece of equipment. That piece of equipment the goggles see that I'm near the equipment, it transports information back to the database, whatever database that may be, that says David Kelly is approaching this piece of equipment. It's verified that it's me because it just knows that through ID verification. That database says, okay, David Kelly has a level 3 level of confidence or competence associated with that machine he's about to use. The AR then reacts accordingly and gives me an appropriate layer of support based on however you're defining level 3, between whether I'm a very new novice or someone who's extremely advanced in using this. That's not science fiction. That's happening today, and it's going to become more and more commonplace. So how does it change our practices? We look at the world that we work in L&D differently.
we have to look beyond just what our world is and look at the full ecosystem of technologies and resources that are available to us. It's one of the reasons there's a lot of interest in our world in the L&D space of looking at the learning and performance ecosystem as a whole. What we do in L&D, but what impacts L&D outside of the work that we do, and how we can work together in that. It's also this idea of learning personalization has emerged, where we can take these technologies to create personalized experiences. And that learning personalization is a phrase that I am a little hesitant on, because I don't really think, in terms of the conversations I've seen, that we're talking about learning personalization. We're talking about educational or training personalization, which, again, not a bad thing, but an important distinction. Most of the conversations I've seen around learning personalization are talking about how to personalize education, which is a good thing, but different than learning, really personalizing learning. When we talk about what personalizing learning looks like, that's where we get into the phrase that I see emerging now, which is digital learning. The conversation that I really like around digital learning is it's the first conversation that I've seen that is truly about the activities related to learning. It's not about normally when we talk about learning in the context of training and education. But the digital learning conversation I'm seeing emerging is how are people learning? What are the activities of an individual who is learning through digital technologies? And that, to me, has tremendous potential. So what does this all look like as I close here? I've gone through a lot of technologies, and I've seen a lot of you looking at me like, wow, okay, so what do I do? Where do I start? You're in the right spot to get prepared. And I say that because the first thing you need to do to really prepare yourself is to plug into what this conversation is. I encourage you to plug in twofold. You're ahead of the curve because you're here. You're plugged in and you want to see what's going on in the learning and technology space. So I applaud you for that. But I encourage you to plug in beyond that, not just in the L&D space, but plug in outside of the L&D space. One of the most important things that I'm always following in our field, or as it relates to the work that we do in our field, is outside of our field. There's a show in Las Vegas every year called the Consumer Electronics Show. That's one of the most important shows of the year for me, because I look at that and I see where is technology going on the consumer market? How is technology changing how we are going to live? And I follow that because that is ultimately going to affect how we learn as individuals, which will ultimately affect how we educate and how we train. But the first thing is to plug in. You have to go beyond plugging in. You have to listen to the conversations that are taking place, like we're doing now. Listen to what not only the presenters are talking about, but what you're talking about each other in the hallways and what you're hearing from other people. When you hear what other people are doing, the next thing you want to do is jump into the conversation. Don't be just a wallflower that's listening. Jump in. Become an active part of the conversation, because when you become an active part of the conversation, that's when you get to the point of understanding the context of it. And that's where you take everything that we've talked about here today and put it into the context of what does it mean to me? What does it mean to the organization that I work for? What does it mean to the work that I do today and the work that I'm going to be doing tomorrow? And the last thing that I encourage you to do is to approach all the work that you do with a spirit of play. Too often we are so involved in the day-to-day of what we do and going towards the next deliverable and what it is that we lose out on play. And if you look at every new technology that's out there with a spirit of play, you look at the world differently. I have somewhere around 237 apps on my phone, which is a problem, I know. But I have that many because anytime there's something new that someone says, oh, you should check this out, I download it immediately so that I can play with it. I may spend only 5 minutes or a day exploring a new app, but I learn a lot through exploring that. I encourage you to approach all the work that you do and the technologies that you approach through a spirit of play, because that's what builds curiosity. And with that, I want to remind you that my slides and all the resources plus a lot more are available through that URL. It'll take you to this page on my website where you can learn a lot more. I'm obviously very passionate about this discussion. So I encourage you, if you want to continue the discussion, I'll be hanging out after this session. I'll be here for the next 2 days, and this is also where you can reach out to me for more information. Thank you so much for being a part of this session and being a part of this community. I love the work that we do. Thank you for continuing to do it, everyone.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
One question maybe? Somebody likes to ask one question? Yes, lady over here.
I don't want to be the person standing in the way of lunch, but
Just let me look back at my... Okay, on interactive video actually. So my question is, what interaction can we have with video right now that we don't... Okay, what is the new interaction we can have with video right now that we don't have before?
so the question, if you didn't hear, is what's available today with interactive video that wasn't available before? There are a number of tools that are emerging that enable us to be, one of the things that always normalizes something within our field is when a tool emerges that it makes it more accessible. You could do anything with video to make it interactive if you have the ability within your organization to code it. There's a lot of things that you could do today to do high-tech stuff. But what's available to the end user to make it accessible to the average instructional designer, there are a lot of tools that are available that enable us to do branching scenarios, that enable you to have hot spots within a video, that enable you to click on it and learn more so that you can either build a branching scenario or dig deeper into something that's being discussed into the video. Happy to talk to you separately about some of the tools that I know that are emerging around that. Don't want to necessarily see like I'm endorsing it here. But there are tools and an increasing nature that are enabling us to play in an interactive video space that weren't available before. I will also add that many of the tools that you might be using today to author content for e-learning are starting to embed some of this into them as well.
Okay, thank you, David, and thank you for asking. So you saw his contact details. Be sure to follow up on that because there is a lot of content there and it's renewed by David time after time. So there's an additional question. Yeah.
Hi, just a question on...
there we go, thank you.
Right in front of you. Just looking at augmented reality and virtual reality, the thing I noticed with what I've seen on augmented, for example, a lot of the healthcare, they're using it. It seems it's very, very good in manufacturing and something that is a prescriptive process, and you see the flow of what you're meant to do, the best practice. I'm just wondering about where we are in terms of facial recognition, advanced algorithms, where there's a level of intangibility on what the answer could be. I'm thinking of a situation, I work in a bank, where you're with a client, you say one thing to a client, the client responds, and through emotional intelligence you can guide that conversation. But there may be times when you said the wrong thing and you have to work your way through that dialogue. That's much more complex to train and to give people that kind of immersive experience. So I'm just wondering in terms of, I've spoken to a few people and they say that level of sophistication and adaptability is 3, 4, 5, 6 years away. What's your view?
So I would answer that two ways. First off, the technology to do that exists. It's just not integrated in a way to give you that solution today. And it's probably a number of years out before that integration results in a tool to do what you're talking about. But it is coming. There's a third answer to it. Facial recognition, I don't think that we've gone through the normalization that's going to happen that needs to happen. There's a privacy discussion that is attached to facial recognition that hasn't happened yet. I'm really intrigued to see what's going to happen with the new iPhone, which hopefully will be waiting for me when I get home. But I'm really curious to see how people react to this idea of it's going to know your face, and that information is going to be stored on a server somewhere so that it can be read. It's going to be interesting to see how that emerges. The third answer I'll give you is, from a certain extent, you can do that today. Not necessarily with literal facial recognition, but if I handed you a Google Glass, and I've actually seen applications of this, you're going to go interact with a customer, or you're going to go through a role play, and I'm going to give you the glass, and you're going to hit the record button before you go do that. And then afterwards, you're going to come to me, and we're going to watch the video that it recorded. And I've seen some really powerful coaching things where even something as simple as you can measure the fact that someone is not, when they were having that conversation, isn't making eye contact because you consistently see them looking at their shoes because their head tilted down. So it's not facial recognition, but it's still a device that is enabling him to find that solution. So I think we're a number of years out from that technology interface that you're describing, but sometimes I look at it and I say, what problem are we looking to solve? And is it possible for me to solve it with the technology I have available today? Because some of what you're describing to do, you could solve today.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you for asking, thank you for answering, David. Thank you all for being here at this session, and I think it's time to go for lunch. And David is still available if you like. Have a real nice lunch. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.